Seneca's warning: without control, you're a slave. You may think you are free because no chains bind your wrists and no master stands above you with a whip. You wake in your own bed, walk in your own home, carry your own name. Yet Seneca would tell you your so-called freedom is an illusion. The most dangerous chains are not made of iron, but of desire. The whip is not in another man's hand, but in your own weakness. The walls of your prison are invisible, but you feel them whenever your cravings drag you where you do not wish to go, whenever fear stops you from living boldly, whenever anger seizes your mind and makes you a servant of rage. This is the kind of slavery Seneca warned about, a slavery that hides beneath comfort, beneath wealth, beneath success. Outwardly, you may look powerful, even enviable, but if you cannot control yourself, if you are ruled by impulses and passions, you are no different from the man who is sold in a marketplace. Worse, perhaps, for he at least knows he is a slave. You, on the other hand, may not even realize your chains until you are fully bound. Think of your life today. How often do you reach for your phone, not because you choose to, but because something unseen pulls at you? How often do you eat, not from hunger, but from habit or restlessness? How often do you say yes when you wish to say no, out of fear of disappointing others? Each time you are obeying a master. Each time you are reminded that freedom is not measured by the absence of chains on your body, but by the mastery you hold over your mind. Seneca's warning is not comfortable, but it is true. Without control, you are a slave. And this slavery is worse than any empire's conquest because it goes unnoticed. You may live and die thinking you were free, yet never once command yourself as a true sovereign would. The man who cannot govern his desires is governed by them. The woman who cannot resist temptation is chained by it. And those who are trapped by fear will live small, timid lives, never realizing that their prison had no walls but the ones they built within. Today we will walk the path with Seneca, listening closely to the voice of a man who lived in the heart of Rome, who stood near emperors and saw firsthand what happens when men let their passions rule them. He offers us not theories alone, but warnings, drawn from blood and power, from wealth and downfall. And if you take his words seriously, you may discover that freedom is far closer than you think, yet it demands the hardest thing of all, to master yourself. Before we can grasp the depth of this warning, we must know the man who gave it. Seneca was not a philosopher locked in a study, cut off from the world's temptations. He was no ivory tower thinker. He lived in the palace of power, surrounded by luxury, corruption, and danger. He was born in Cordoba in Spain, but made his way to Rome, where he became a statesman, a tutor to the young Nero, and a counselor at the highest levels of empire. He was wealthy, far wealthier than many of his fellow Stoics. He dined among nobles, walked in courts of intrigue, and yet still wrote words that called men back to virtue, simplicity, and restraint. His life itself was a paradox. Here was a man who possessed riches and status, yet warned against being enslaved by them. Here was a man who served Nero, a tyrant who became the very embodiment of unrestrained desire, yet Seneca counseled moderation and control. He was not blind to his contradictions. Indeed, his writings often reveal a man wrestling with his own position, striving to apply Stoic principles even while caught in the machinery of Roman politics. That is what gives his words weight. He knew the temptations of wealth, of influence, of indulgence. He was not preaching from poverty, but from abundance. And still he said, "No man is free who is a slave to his body." Still, he reminded us that true power lies not in what you command outwardly, but in what you govern inwardly. He was, in many ways, a man who walked on the edge of two worlds, the world of Stoic discipline and the world of Roman excess. His letters to Lucilius, his treatises on anger, life, and death, were not distant lectures but urgent messages, written to those he cared for, written as reminders to himself. He knew the fragility of life, the nearness of death, and the danger of being consumed by passion. And so, when Seneca tells us that without control we are slaves, he does not speak lightly. He speaks from experience, from the sharp knowledge of how desire and fear twist men into puppets, how even emperors can be the most enslaved of all. To hear Seneca is to be reminded that freedom is not given by birth, not earned by wealth, not secured by laws. It is carved out by self-mastery. If you would live free, you must first learn to command yourself. That is the lesson Seneca offers, and it is the path we now begin to walk together. What does it mean to be a slave? In the ancient world, slavery was clear and visible. A man was owned, his body controlled, his labor extracted. He belonged to another, his choices stripped from him. Shackles and chains made the reality undeniable. Freedom was a matter of law and circumstance, and those bound by chains longed for release. But Seneca's words strike deeper, for he speaks of a slavery that no law can abolish and no master can free you from. It is the slavery of the mind, of the heart, of the soul. It is when your reason no longer commands your actions, but instead is dragged by impulses like a chariot without reins. This slavery requires no master, for the passions themselves serve as tyrants: desire, fear, anger, greed. To be mastered by these is to surrender your sovereignty. Think of the person who lives for approval, who cannot stand without praise. That man is a slave to opinion, though no chains bind him. Consider the one who cannot resist indulgence, who eats, drinks, and consumes beyond measure. He may laugh in the moment, but in truth he is under command, ruled not by reason, but by appetite. Consider the man who burns with envy, who cannot rest while another prospers. He thinks himself free, yet he is bound by the success of others. We often believe that slavery is something external, imposed upon us from outside, but Seneca insists that the worst form of it is internal, self-imposed. A man may live in a palace, yet be enslaved to his fears. Another may live in poverty, yet walk with dignity, master of himself. Freedom and slavery are not conditions of circumstance, but conditions of the soul. And here is the danger. External chains can be broken by force, by escape, by law. But the chains we do not see, the chains of passion, remain hidden. You can go through life believing yourself free, never realizing that you have bowed to countless masters. A craving calls, and you obey. A fear arises, and you retreat. An insult strikes, and you lash out. Where in that cycle do you command yourself? Where in that chaos do you act as master? If you are driven more than you drive, you have already surrendered. This is the slavery Seneca warned of, the bondage that endures even in nations that call themselves free, in men who believe they are masters of their fate. It is not the world that chains them, but their own unruled desires. And unless you learn to take back command, you too will live as a servant, perhaps a comfortable one, perhaps an admired one, but a servant nonetheless. One of the greatest tyrants that enslaves us is desire. Desire seems innocent enough. It whispers of pleasure, of joy, of satisfaction. It promises fulfillment, paints a picture of a life made complete by the next acquisition, the next victory, the next indulgence. And yet, as Seneca and every Stoic understood, desire is a master who never rests. A man who feeds desire discovers soon enough that its hunger only grows. The satisfaction you feel when you acquire what you wanted fades quickly, and then a new craving rises, stronger, sharper, hungrier. Desire is not sated by giving into it, it is inflamed. As a fire fed with wood only grows larger, so too does desire consume more and more of you, the more you obey it. Look at the world around you. We live in an age of endless consumption. A new phone is released, and millions rush to acquire it. Clothes go out of fashion within months. Advertisements whisper that you are incomplete without the newest upgrade, the latest experience, the most luxurious comfort. Desire drives this entire machinery, enslaving people not with chains, but with hunger for what they do not yet have. Seneca warned that the man who lives in the grip of desire is never rich, no matter how much he owns, for every gain is shadowed by a new craving. The wealthiest emperor, if he is still longing for more, is poorer than the humble man who has learned to want less. To chase desire is to run endlessly, never arriving, never resting. Think of your own life. What is it that you chase, believing it will finally satisfy you? Is it wealth, status, recognition, the perfect body, the perfect home? How many times have you told yourself, if only I had this, I would be content? And how many times has that contentment lasted more than a breath before you were pulled toward the next desire? Seneca challenges us to see desire not as a friend, but as a master. Each time you obey without question, you place another shackle on yourself. Each time you bend to craving, you tighten the chain. To be ruled by desire is to live as a servant to something that never delivers what it promises. The Stoic path is not to kill desire altogether, but to master it. To put reason above craving, to decide when something is worthy and when it is not. The goal is freedom, to be able to enjoy what is present without being enslaved by what is absent. Seneca did not call for the destruction of pleasure, but for its proper place. The man who enjoys without clinging, who can walk away without longing, is the man who stands free. Ask yourself now, what is it that rules you? Is it the endless hunger for wealth, the thirst for status, the craving for approval? If so, you are not free, no matter what the world says. Only when you stand above desire, only when you can say, I will choose, not you, do you finally step into freedom. For as long as desire commands you, you live as its slave. And Seneca's warning is clear. No empire, no possession, no achievement will matter if you remain shackled inside. Fear is another master that rules more people than armies ever have. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." His words are as true today as they were in ancient Rome. Fear creates prisons where none exist. It makes men bow to shadows, tremble at possibilities, and surrender before the battle has even begun. A man who is free in body can still be chained in spirit if fear holds him captive. Consider the fear of death, perhaps the oldest of all. Men exhaust themselves in pursuit of wealth, comfort, and glory, not because these things make life meaningful, but because they hope they might delay or distract from death. Yet the end comes for all, emperor and slave alike. Seneca reminded us that to fear death is to live half dead already. If you spend your days running from the inevitable, you have surrendered your freedom long before your final hour. There is also the fear of failure. How many remain trapped in small, timid lives, not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because they fear what might happen if they try and stumble? Fear paralyzes them. They never write the book, never start the business, never speak the truth, because they imagine failure as a monster that would destroy them. In reality, failure is but a teacher, and often a kinder one than success. Yet fear blinds them to this and keeps them silent, keeps them small. And then there is the fear of opinion. This fear has grown into a giant in our age, where every voice can echo across the world. Men and women bend themselves into shapes that please others, terrified of disapproval. They live not according to reason, but according to the applause or scorn of strangers. To be enslaved by the opinion of others is perhaps the most tragic of all, for you become a puppet, dancing to the strings of 1,000 unseen masters. The Romans lived under tyrants whose whims could end a life in an instant. Yet Seneca would argue that the tyranny of fear within is even harsher, for it is constant and self-imposed. The antidote is courage, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. A Stoic does not claim he feels no fear, he claims he will not kneel to it. Freedom comes not by erasing fear, but by facing it with reason, by remembering that most fears exist only in the mind, and that even the worst fate is rarely as terrible as imagination makes it. If desire tempts us with promises, fear traps us with threats. Both enslave, both must be mastered. Otherwise you may spend your life running toward what will not satisfy and running away from what was never so dangerous. To live like that is not to live at all. Among the passions that enslave, none burns as fiercely or destroys as quickly as anger. Seneca devoted an entire treatise to it, calling anger a kind of temporary madness. He observed how it seizes men, stripping away reason and leaving only impulse. Anger is not only a chain, it is a fire, and often the first to consume is the one who carries it. Think of how many lives have been destroyed by a moment of rage. A careless word spoken in anger severs friendships. A violent act done in fury ends in lifelong regret. Wars have begun, families have split, and innocent lives have been lost because men allowed themselves to be ruled by that brief storm. Seneca knew this well, for Rome was a city fueled by rivalry and vengeance. Yet his advice echoes even now. The man who gives in to anger is no master, but a slave to his own fury. In daily life, anger appears more subtle but no less destructive. A quarrel between lovers that escalates into bitterness. A driver who erupts in fury on the road, endangering himself and others. A heated argument online that consumes hours of energy and leaves nothing behind but division. In each case, anger whispers that it is justified, that it gives strength, that it proves courage. But in truth, it weakens the one who yields to it. The man who cannot restrain his anger shows not strength, but fragility. He is governed by his temper instead of governing it. Seneca's remedy is both simple and profound. Delay. Anger thrives on speed, on immediate reaction. When insulted, it demands retaliation. When injured, it demands vengeance. But if you pause, if you step back and let reason reassert itself, anger loses its power. The greatest remedy for anger is delay, Seneca wrote, urging us to treat it not as a righteous flame, but as a dangerous madness. This does not mean a Stoic feels nothing. He may feel the first spark of anger, for he is human, but he refuses to fan it into flame. He refuses to be carried away. He pauses, reflects, and chooses action guided by reason rather than impulse. This is the freedom Seneca speaks of, the freedom to act instead of merely react. Modern life offers endless invitations to anger. Social media thrives on outrage, pulling people into constant fury. News cycles fuel indignation. Everywhere, someone is trying to provoke, to enrage, to stir up. And the more we give in, the more we live as slaves, manipulated by those who know how to trigger our temper. To master anger is to reclaim yourself. To refuse its chains is not weakness, but sovereignty. For the man who rules his anger rules his life. while the one who obeys it lives as a captive, burning in the fire he kindled with his own hand. Seneca would remind us, freedom is not the absence of insult, nor the absence of injustice, but the power to choose how you respond. Anger makes you a servant, control makes you free. Pleasure is a subtler master, one that enslaves with a smile instead of a whip. Seneca warned that indulgence, though sweet in the moment, leaves behind decay. Pleasure whispers of ease, of delight, of reward, but behind its sweetness lurks dependency. When a man cannot be content without constant stimulation, constant comfort, constant indulgence, he is no longer free. He has traded sovereignty of soul for fleeting gratification. In Rome, banquets overflowed with delicacies. Nobles reclined at long tables, consuming until they could consume no more, then sought ways to continue still. The pursuit of pleasure became a kind of worship, and yet it left them weaker, softer, and more enslaved to appetite. Seneca watched these scenes and saw not freedom, but bondage. For the man who cannot endure the absence of pleasure has no strength when hardship arrives. He is like a soldier who trains only in gardens, collapsing when faced with the battlefield. Our world is little different. The banquets may be replaced by endless streaming, fast food chains, endless entertainment at our fingertips. Pleasure is available instantly, cheaply, abundantly, but like those Romans, we weaken ourselves with indulgence. The body grows dull, the mind restless, the spirit empty. We tell ourselves we are free because pleasure is within reach at any moment, yet in truth we are chained, for we cannot live without it. Seneca did not demand that we renounce pleasure entirely. He was no enemy of enjoyment, no advocate of joyless austerity. His warning was against enslavement. The wise man, he said, does not hate pleasure, but refuses to be ruled by it. He can enjoy a meal, but is not mastered by his appetite. He can sit at a banquet and yet remain detached, ready to walk away. Pleasure, when taken in moderation and under reason's command, can be savored without chains. But when pleasure becomes necessity, freedom is lost. Ask yourself, can you go without the entertainments you consume daily? Can you sit in silence without reaching for distraction? Can you face discomfort without immediately searching for relief? If not, pleasure has bound you. The chains may feel soft, but they are chains nonetheless. To free yourself is to practice moderation, to endure discomfort, to remind your body and mind that they are servants, not masters. Then, when hardship comes, as it always does, you will not collapse like the indulgent, but stand firm, trained in restraint. Wealth presents itself as power, yet it too often becomes a golden cage. Seneca knew this paradox well, for he himself possessed immense wealth, yet wrote more urgently than most about the dangers of being owned by riches. Wealth is the slave of a wise man, the master of a fool, he declared. The line is sharp, and its truth pierces across centuries. Money itself is neutral. It is the relationship we form with it that determines whether it serves us or enslaves us. The man who chases wealth endlessly, who measures his worth only by what he has, is never free. His life is dictated not by virtue or reason, but by the endless hunger for more. The rich man who cannot rest, who cannot stop striving, who fears loss at every turn, is more anxious than the poor man who has learned to want little. Wealth promises security, but often delivers dependence, for once accustomed to riches, a man trembles at the thought of living without them. Rome was filled with such men, senators who could not sleep without counting their fortunes, generals who marched for conquest not out of duty but out of greed, citizens who sought luxury beyond imagination yet lived in constant fear of losing it. Seneca stood among them and saw their slavery. Outwardly powerful, they were inwardly weak, bound by their attachment to gold and possessions. Our age mirrors theirs. People chase higher salaries, larger homes, more luxurious lifestyles. Yet ask them if they feel free, and often the answer is silence. Debt, obligations, endless work to sustain appearances. All these reveal that wealth can own a person more thoroughly than poverty. The golden cage is adorned with luxuries, but it is still a cage. Seneca himself was accused of hypocrisy, for he wrote about simplicity while living with wealth. Yet this is precisely what makes his voice compelling. He knew the temptation of riches. He did not preach from poverty, but from abundance, urging his readers and himself to treat wealth as a tool, never as a master. To hold it lightly, to use it well, to be ready to part with it at any moment without sorrow. The question is not whether you have wealth, but whether wealth has you. Do you own your possessions, or do they own you? If your happiness depends on their increase, you are chained. If you fear their loss above all else, you are not free. But if you can enjoy what you have without clinging, if you can give generously and let go without grief, then wealth becomes your servant, not your tyrant. Seneca's wisdom calls us to live as masters of what we own, not as slaves to what we crave. The world may measure power in coins and estates, but the Stoic measures it in freedom of soul. Better to have little with liberty than to be rich and yet imprisoned in a golden cage. True wealth is not stored in vaults, but in virtue, in the calm independence of one who no longer bows to possessions. Time is the most precious possession we have, yet it is the one we squander most carelessly. Seneca, in his work on the shortness of life, declared, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." These words strike at the core of human folly. We guard our money, we defend our property, we measure our wealth in possessions, yet we spend our hours and days as though they were infinite, as though tomorrow is promised. But time, unlike wealth, can never be reclaimed once it is gone. To waste time is to lose what cannot be restored, and to live without recognizing its value is to live as a slave to distraction. In Rome, citizens filled arenas for games that lasted days, spectacles that consumed attention and dulled the mind. Hours slipped away in meaningless diversions, just as today they slip away in endless scrolling, in binge-watching, in shallow pursuits that promise entertainment but deliver emptiness. Seneca saw the danger. A man can live 70 years and yet truly live only a fraction, because so much of his time was stolen by things unworthy of him. He believed that to give your time without thought is a greater loss than to give away your gold. For lost wealth can return, but lost time is gone forever. And yet, how many of us live as though our days were endless? We delay what matters, waiting for some distant future to begin living rightly. We tell ourselves we will practice virtue tomorrow, we will pursue wisdom when life slows down, we will turn inward after we finish our present pursuits. But tomorrow is not ours to command. Death may come at any hour. To postpone the work of the soul is to gamble with the only currency that truly matters. Seneca's warning is clear. When you allow time to slip away through idleness, through meaningless distraction, you live in chains. For you are not directing your life, but letting it be consumed by forces outside your control. Freedom is found in reclaiming your time, in choosing to spend it with intention, in using each day as though it were your last. To treat time as the rarest treasure is to live fully, awake, free. The slave squanders his time as commanded by others. The free man governs his hours according to reason and virtue. If slavery to desire, fear, anger, pleasure, wealth, and wasted time binds us, what then is the key to breaking these chains? Seneca answers without hesitation: self-control. The essence of Stoic freedom lies not in external conditions, but in mastery of the self. He who governs his mind and actions is a king, even if outwardly he wears no crown. He who fails to govern himself is a slave, even if he rules over empires. Self-control is not repression. It is not the denial of every impulse or the crushing of every emotion. Rather, it is sovereignty, the power to choose deliberately instead of being dragged blindly. It is the strength to say no when reason demands, to say yes when virtue calls, and to remain unmoved when passions seek to seize the reins. This is the freedom the Stoics treasured above all, to be the master of oneself. But how do we cultivate this mastery? Seneca gives us guidance. First, pause before reaction. When anger surges, when desire calls, when fear whispers, stop. Create space between impulse and action. In that space, reason can speak. Even a moment of delay can turn madness into clarity. Second, limit desires. Do not chase endlessly after more, for he who limits what he needs is rich. Practice contentment with what is before you. The man who demands little from fortune is never its slave. Each time you resist an unnecessary craving, you strengthen your chains of command over yourself. Third, practice voluntary hardship. Seneca advised occasionally living as though you were poor, eating coarse food, wearing rough clothes, sleeping on the floor. In doing so, you remind yourself that you can endure loss, that pleasure and luxury are not necessary for survival. By rehearsing hardship, you weaken fear and strengthen freedom. Fourth, reflect daily. The Stoics ended each day by reviewing their actions. Where was I ruled by passion? Where did I master myself? Reflection sharpens awareness, and awareness leads to growth. Without reflection, habits remain hidden. With it, they are exposed and can be reshaped. Seneca's own letters to Lucilius are filled with these practices, urging his friend to treat philosophy not as theory, but as training. For freedom is not won once, but practiced daily. It is a discipline, a lifelong labor, a constant strengthening of the will against the temptations of the world and the weakness of the flesh. When you begin to reclaim self-control, you feel the weight of chains loosening. Fear no longer dictates your choices. Desire no longer drags you endlessly. Anger no longer hurls you into regret. Pleasure no longer binds you with its sweetness. Wealth no longer commands your value. Time no longer slips from you unnoticed. Instead, you stand as master, directing your life with reason, living not as a servant to impulse, but as a sovereign of your soul. This is the freedom that no tyrant can steal, no misfortune can break, no poverty can diminish. It is the only true freedom, the one Seneca urged us to seek with all our strength. For without control we are slaves, with control we are kings, and kingship over oneself is greater than rule over any empire. Discipline is the crown of inner sovereignty. Seneca saw discipline not as harshness, but as self-rule, the steady governance of the soul that allows a man to stand unshaken, no matter what storms surround him. The undisciplined man may appear free, doing as he pleases, chasing every whim, indulging every craving. But this is no freedom. It is servitude disguised as liberty. The disciplined man, though he restrains himself, though he seems to deny certain pleasures, possesses a deeper liberty, for he is bound by nothing he has not chosen. Think of Rome's generals, whose armies marched at their command. Their legions obeyed because of their discipline, their readiness to endure hardship without breaking. A single soldier without discipline was weak, an army without discipline was chaos. So too with the soul. Without discipline, the passions scatter your strength, tearing you apart in every direction. With discipline, the soul becomes like a well-trained legion, united, firm, and ready for battle. Modern life praises freedom as doing what you want when you want. But Seneca reminds us that such a life is actually chaos. If you eat whatever you crave, speak whatever bursts forth, buy whatever tempts you, avoid whatever frightens you, then you are not free, you are a servant to your impulses. Discipline is what makes freedom real. It is the power to say no to what enslaves, yes to what strengthens, and to remain steady in both abundance and hardship. The disciplined athlete rises early, trains when tired, and restrains indulgence not because he hates pleasure, but because he seeks mastery. The disciplined writer sits daily at the desk, whether inspired or not, producing work steadily rather than waiting for whims. The disciplined monk renounces distractions to cultivate peace within. Each demonstrates that discipline is not deprivation, but sovereignty. It is the declaration that I rule myself. Seneca's lesson is clear. Sovereignty begins with the soul. He who conquers cities may still be a slave to greed. He who commands armies may still be a slave to fear. But he who commands himself is master of all. Discipline is not a cage. It is the key that unlocks freedom. It is not a punishment. It is the practice of kingship over one's own being. In a world where most live as subjects of their appetites, the disciplined stand as rulers of themselves. This leads us to the great paradox of freedom. The world often assumes that freedom belongs to those who can do as they wish, who are bound by no rules, who can indulge any desire. But Seneca and the Stoics alongside him invert this notion. The man who follows every desire is no more free than a leaf blown in the wind. He does not choose his course. His passions choose it for him. Outwardly, he may appear powerful. He may be a senator, a general, even an emperor, but inwardly he is chained. Contrast Nero, the pupil who sat under Seneca's guidance, with Socrates, the philosopher of Athens. Nero, emperor of Rome, commanded armies and vast wealth, yet was consumed by paranoia, rage, and indulgence. He ruled the greatest empire of his age, but could not rule himself. His freedom was an illusion. In truth, he lived as the most pitiable of slaves, dragged by passions until they destroyed him. Socrates, on the other hand, owned little, commanded no armies, held no crown. Yet he faced death with calm, accepted poverty with equanimity, and lived according to reason and virtue. Outwardly, he had nothing. Inwardly, he was sovereign. He possessed the one freedom that cannot be stripped away, mastery of self. When condemned to death, he drank the poison without fear, for he knew that freedom lies not in the length of days, but in the integrity of the soul. Here lies the paradox. The poor man who governs himself may be freer than the king who does not. The prisoner who accepts his fate with wisdom may be freer than the wealthy man consumed by greed. For freedom is not the power to do as you wish, but the power to wish rightly. It is not the absence of restraint, but the presence of mastery. Seneca calls us to redefine freedom not as the world defines it, but as the soul knows it. True freedom is inner sovereignty. It is the ability to stand firm against desire, to face fear without surrender, to master anger, to enjoy pleasure without chains, to hold wealth without being held by it, to use time with purpose. The paradox is that the path to this freedom requires discipline, restraint, and self-control, the very things many mistake for slavery. Yet the man who embraces them walks unbound, while the one who rejects them lives fettered by unseen chains. Thus the Stoic reminds us, the measure of your freedom is not in what you own, not in what you can command, not in what you are permitted to do. The measure of your freedom is whether you command yourself. If you do not, you are a slave, no matter how high you rise. If you do, you are free, no matter how little you possess. Seneca did not leave us only with warnings. He offered practices to train inner freedom, exercises to strengthen the will as a muscle. Philosophy, for him, was not an abstract pursuit, but a form of training, a discipline for the soul. Just as the body grows strong through labor, the spirit grows free through deliberate practice. Without exercise, freedom remains a theory. With it, freedom becomes flesh and blood. One of the most powerful exercises is negative visualization. The Stoics advised us to imagine loss before it comes, to think of death, of poverty, of exile, of losing what we hold dear. This is not to invite despair, but to loosen our attachment. When you imagine life without comfort, you learn to appreciate what you have without clinging to it. When you rehearse death, you learn not to fear it. The man who accepts loss in his mind is stronger when loss arrives in reality. He is no longer a slave to fear, for he has already faced the worst in thought and found it survivable. Another practice is memento mori, the remembrance of death. Seneca reminded his readers that death is not in the distance, but walks beside us each day. To live as though death were near is to live fully, awake to the brevity of time. When you remember that today could be your last, you stop wasting hours on trivialities. You speak truth more freely, you love more urgently, you act with more courage. Death becomes not a terror, but a guide pointing you back to what matters. Daily journaling was another Stoic habit. At the end of each day, they reviewed their actions, asking, "Where did I live as a master of myself? Where did I surrender to passion?" This self-examination exposes weakness and strengthens resolve. Without reflection, the soul drifts. With reflection, the soul is corrected. Seneca himself urged Lucilius to practice this. To hold himself accountable as a general reviews his soldiers after battle. Each day becomes a lesson, each mistake a teacher. Perhaps the most challenging exercise is voluntary discomfort. Seneca advised practicing poverty even when wealthy. Wear rough clothes, eat coarse food, sleep on the ground. Is this what I feared? You ask yourself. By rehearsing hardship, you prove to yourself that comfort is not necessary for survival. Fear of poverty fades when you know you can endure it. Fear of hunger weakens when you have tasted it willingly. Pleasure loses its chains when you remind yourself that you do not depend on it. Modern life offers many forms of voluntary discomfort. Fasting from food or technology, walking instead of driving, cold showers, silence amid constant noise. Each act is small, but each builds resilience. Each teaches the body that it is servant, not master, and trains the mind to stand firm when genuine hardship arrives. The Stoic message is this: do not wait for freedom to fall upon you. Train for it, practice it, strengthen it daily. As muscles grow with repetition, so too does sovereignty of soul. The exercises of philosophy are not for idle thought, but for daily life. They are weapons and shields for the battle within. To live Seneca's warning today is no easy task. The world has grown louder, more distracting, more filled with temptations than even Rome in its height. If the Romans had their banquets and spectacles, we have infinite screens and endless consumption. If they sought wealth in estates and conquest, we chase it in markets and careers. If they indulged in luxury, we drown in conveniences designed to remove every discomfort. The chains may look different, but they bind just the same. Modern society thrives on our lack of self-control. Entire industries profit when we surrender to craving, advertising, entertainment, technology, food. Our attention is bought and sold. Our desires are studied, manipulated, and magnified. The more we obey them, the deeper the chains tighten. To live without vigilance is to become a servant of systems designed to keep you enslaved to consumption and distraction. And yet, Seneca's words cut through the centuries like a blade. They remind us that true freedom is still possible, even in a world determined to erode it. To live as a Stoic today is to resist the constant pull toward passivity, indulgence, and fear. It is to choose depth over distraction, restraint over indulgence, courage over comfort. This does not mean retreating from the world. Seneca himself lived in the center of power, in the heart of Rome's chaos. It means living differently within the world, refusing to let its forces rule you. To scroll less and reflect more, to consume less and create more, to speak truth instead of seeking approval, to act from reason instead of reacting from impulse, to guard your time as your most precious treasure. Such a life will not be ordinary. The masses will not understand it. They may mock restraint, question discipline, resist silence. But the Stoic does not seek approval from the crowd. He seeks freedom of soul. And in a world enslaved to comfort and distraction, the one who practices self-control shines as a rare figure of sovereignty. Seneca's message is as urgent now as it was then. If you do not master yourself, the world will master you. If you do not claim your freedom within, you will be ruled by forces without. The chains are invisible, but they are real. To live free today requires the same discipline, the same reflection, the same courage that Seneca urged centuries ago. Without them, you will live comfortably, but not freely. With them, you may stand against the tide, unshaken, unenslaved. Seneca's warning comes to its sharpest point in the conclusion. Without control, you are a slave. It does not matter how rich you are, how powerful, how admired. If you are ruled by desire, you are a servant. If fear dictates your choices, you are in chains. If anger drives you, you live as a captive to rage. If pleasure and wealth hold your heart, then you bow before them as any slave bows before his master. Freedom is not a gift of fortune, not a privilege of birth, not a prize of conquest. It is the result of mastery, mastery of yourself. Look closely at the world around you. Many wear crowns of success, yet beneath them are shackles of anxiety. Many possess wealth beyond measure, yet tremble at the thought of losing it. Many indulge in pleasure daily, yet are restless, unsatisfied, unable to endure its absence. They are not free. They are merely slaves in disguise, prisoners who decorate their cells with gold. And unless they learn control, they will live and die in bondage without ever realizing it. The truth is uncomfortable, but it is liberating. Freedom is within your reach. It is not granted by rulers, not dependent on circumstance. It does not wait in some future moment when the world finally aligns with your wishes. It exists here, now, in the discipline you choose, in the self-control you practice, in the sovereignty you claim over your own soul. The man who masters himself cannot be enslaved by anything outside of him. Misfortune may strike, death may come, fortune may fade, but his freedom remains untouched, for it was never built on externals. This is the call Seneca places before us, to choose mastery over slavery, to rule ourselves rather than be ruled. Each day offers the test. Each desire is a chain waiting to be broken. Each fear is a prison waiting to be walked through. Each indulgence is a master waiting to be resisted. The choice is always yours, to obey or to command, to kneel or to stand. Do not mistake comfort for freedom. Do not mistake indulgence for liberty. True freedom is harder, rarer, and more precious. It requires vigilance, discipline, courage. It demands that you rise above impulse and live according to reason. But once gained, it is unshakable. No tyrant can take it, no loss can strip it, no death can destroy it. So ask yourself now, with all honesty, who is your master? Is it your desire, your fear, your anger, your wealth, your comforts, or is it yourself? The chains may be invisible, but you can feel their weight, and the key lies not outside of you, but within. Seneca's warning echoes through the centuries, a truth as urgent now as it was in Rome. Without control, you are a slave. With control, you are free. Your life, your freedom, your sovereignty, these are not distant promises. They are decisions, they are practices, they are the result of each choice you make. Today, you can begin. Today, you can take command. Break the chains, reclaim your time, master your passions. For the greatest empire you will ever rule is yourself.